Good morning. Normally evening, but good morning. This is Nick from Beer and Broadband. We come to you remote this time versus our last episode where we were live at Mountain Connect. We are super excited to have another episode of Beer and Broadband. We've got some very smart people on the video today and audio, of course. And so let's jump right into it. We'll do introductions, and then we've got some amazing topics to talk about today that I think are super relevant for what's happening in our world. So let's start at my far left with Mr. Hollister.
Hey, good morning. Glad to be here and co-host of the show, Brian Hollister, CEO of Bonfire Engineering and Construction and SPARQ Open Fiber. So thanks a lot for being here. I love being on this show and really appreciate everyone's time.
All right, we'll slide on down to Megan over in lovely DC area.
Yes, I am Megan. I am the Director of Broadband Programs at Learn Design Apply. I am located in DC, representing here with my background and a DC beer. I might be the only one, but
Cheers.
Cheers, Nick. Learn Design Apply is located all across the country, so we help people in literally every region of the United States. We are a grant management and consulting company. I specifically help people get funding for broadband.
Very applicable to this podcast and the topics of the day. So, all right, we'll go down to the bottom of my screen, Mr. Drew Clark.
Good morning. Welcome. Thank you. I'm normally on the other side of this. So normally I'm like welcoming people and saying, hey, we were joined because we at Broadband Breakfast, of which I'm the CEO, editor, and publisher, we bring people together around better broadband and better lives. And we do that through our weekly Broadband Breakfast live online every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time, and through our original reporting every business day on Broadband Breakfast. We have the freshest and smartest take on what's happening in broadband policy and internet technology, and really happy to have been invited to join this podcast, although I insisted when I got invited by Nick that I'm going to do root beer for broadband and root beer, but really happy to be here with all of you today. Welcome.
And last but certainly not least, a returning guest, Russ.
Hey, good morning, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again. Russ, Elliott, Megan and her team's biggest fan, and also CEO of Siskiyou Telephone here in Northern California. So glad to be here. Been on Drew's show too, and just love participating in these types of events where we can talk about doing good work that we're doing right now. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the news, a lot going on in our world of broadband, and I think we can all agree, we share the passion for bringing broadband to more people and more communities across the United States. So with this kind of diverse group of people, we really wanted to delve into a couple of different topics. And well, since the government is obviously seemingly always in the news for one reason or another, let's start with discussing some government entities. So specifically the FCC. So one of the things that has come up is of debate, I think, is, what power does the FCC have, or should they have, over the broadband expansion that all of us are trying to enable and facilitate? Anybody can answer.
Well, the FCC has a huge role. Historically, certainly, they are the entity that governs the policies around universal service, the Universal Service Fund, which is a revolving fund of roughly $10 billion every year. Telecommunications users pay in, and then broadband users take out, which creates a lot of problems because of mismatch between who's paying and who's getting. But the big story of the latest round of broadband funding, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is that Congress said, actually, FCC, we're going to pass on letting you guys take any of this money. We're going to give it all to the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And a lot of people saw that as a slap in the face of the FCC, in part because of the criticisms of the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, the reverse auction they conducted for broadband deployment in 2020. So FCC is going to be involved because they are the keepers of this map, the mythic unicorn-like map that may or may not ever exist, and they've been given the keys to it for good or ill, and probably mostly for ill. And that's kind of why the FCC is going to be involved, whether we want them involved or not, in the broadband infrastructure build out.
Yeah, I'll kind of tag on to that from what Drew was saying in terms of mapping. With the BEAD money that is coming out, all of the states are getting $100 million to begin with. And the rest of their money is coming based off those FCC maps. So those maps will be used to determine what is unserved. So again, if they're inaccurate, states can challenge, but whether those challenges will be accepted, whether they'll be listened to is another question. But they have a big impact on broadband expansion, especially right now with that BEAD money, that they will determine how much states are getting.
So I guess, Russ, though, what do you think as somebody who's running a business that has to deal with the FCC?
Yeah,
I've had
the pleasure of working on both sides of this, right on the state policy side and now into the public or the private side. And what I see, to tag on to what everybody said already, the FCC is kind of the battle, or not a battle, it's more like a carrier, right? And it's got some flawed policies, and you can't turn those things around quickly. Some of those flawed policies have been around, what is served, and we've changed that definition in the last 3 years exponentially, and you don't just turn that carrier around on a dime and say, oh, okay, today we're going to do 25/3, now we're going to do 50 by, and then now we're going to do 100 by, right? This thing's just still trying to figure out how to get off of 6-1, right? So it's still trying to turn the corner. And so that's, I think, the biggest flaw has been that it's just hard to manipulate and change as the dynamically changing environment has been changing here. So, you do have this agency that will be in control because they will have the map. They've got the keys, and it's been very well documented in all the new legislation that no money runs until that map is figured out, right? Whether that's flawed or not, we'll see. As a carrier now that has to respond to it, I'm encouraged that they have come to us to help make certain that map is correct, not just on what we serve and how much we serve, but exactly the locations and where they are. So we're starting to get down. My biggest thing when I was the state director of both those states of Wyoming and Washington was, where are these locations, right? Wyoming was so spread out. You had 500,000 people, and you've got that in a high rise in downtown San Fran right now, right? But you have those over the expanse of a state. Where are people? Where are those locations? How do I get to them? How do I get them served? So what I'm encouraged about now is really we're starting to drill down on location-specific information. So I see it coming. The challenge will be, it's probably not coming anytime soon. There's going to be a process where we've got to vet all these locations. We as carriers or providers now are going to have to give back and say, we challenge your data because it's not right where those locations are. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I've got an inside look at all this because I'm a provider and we've gotten the data already. And that data is not good. This first run of data is garbage, right? So we've got a lot of locations that just don't exist. And so we're having to go through that now and vet it ourselves. So that's where we're at.
Russ, it might be useful to just speak a little bit about the fabric, so-called, versus the map. And so when you said you've got that data, I think what you're referring to is that you have access to the broadband service location fabric. Correct. That is to say, what addresses the FCC is now going to collect data from the carriers like you to match against that fabric. Is that fair, Russ?
That is correct. Yeah, it's location-specific fabric now versus census blocks and census tracts and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So we're down to that fabric.
Okay, so why is the fabric faulty versus the data that's going to match against the fabric? Like what, can you just explain what the problems you're seeing?
Because the addresses that are coming up are fictitious. Okay. So they've got addresses that don't exist, right? The addresses are not matching up with what we have been doing. The company I'm working for right now has been serving this area for 130 years. They know.
Well, Drew did say mythical. So I guess, right. We did say it's.
Yeah, and so the data has come in, and our first look at this data, there's at least 30% of this data is garbage, right? It's just stuff that just doesn't exist. So now we've got to go back and it's called a challenge versus like a collaborative work process, right? We're now having to challenge, which feels already conflict, of conflict. But we're going to have to go back and give them better location data, and then see if they accept our location data that we know better than anybody because we've been serving it for 130 years. So it's an interesting process, and how quickly they'll turn this this carrier around will be, it's going to be interesting. So I think in my little humble opinion, it's been my opinion since I've been working for the states, is states should be out there taking care of themselves, right? They should be building some maps right now to kind of really understand where they're at. And I think a lot of states are. And I think that's still good work that needs to get done, so they can also be part of that conversation.
Do you think there's some collaboration with some of the states that are doing that type of work? Because some states are actually really, really doing an exceptional job in trying to validate the data. Is there any collaboration, do you know of, that where they're working with some of the states that are investing heavily in trying to get accurate maps?
What's scary, Brian, is when, because I stood a map up in Wyoming, then I stood one up in Washington. And what's scary is the FCC called me when they were going through this process of mapping. And they really didn't listen to anything I was saying at the time. They were so dead set on, we've got $96 million. We're going to spend it on our map in our way that we know is right. And we don't have to listen to you guys. Though I got an audience with them, one on their board of 4 or 5 or 6, wherever they were. It was really a very cold conversation. There was no real conversation of collaboration or leveraging the data that we had at the time. So it felt more adversarial than it did feel like it was going to be a collaborative discussion around how we're going to build maps. And I think, again, the behemoth, that you've got of the FCC out there, it had $96 million in their pocket. They had a very big national contract that they've been working with, and they continued with that company. And they felt like that was the best direction. And it really didn't feel like they were party to any conversations that we were having in the beginning. So I'm not confident in the collaborative approach.
I would say that's kind of common, I think, for everyone. I will shout out to Drew, read an article that he wrote recently about state mapping and federal mapping, and how it's kind of coming to a head now or soon that, what are you going to rely on? What's going to be used in the grants world? What is going to be the final decision maker? And, it is an important thing because this is going to determine who's getting funded.
I guess the question is, how much is this going to delay from a timing perspective, right? So, I mean, there's been the rush
on their own is going to be delayed just from them doing that, and then extending that through the challenge process will be an even bigger one. And it's very exciting, the amount of money that is in the BEAD program, but also it's not immediate into projects.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way NTIA is put together, which I think is brilliant, is they're bringing the money to the states and they're allowing the states to pick the sub-grantees. So in my opinion, every state should have some type of an opportunity to be able to tell where are we served and where are we unserved. And they have to have the tools to give to those local communities to have educated decisions and have good intentional conversations around where are we going to get those shovel-ready projects? Where should we invest these funds, public or private? Where do we have to do that? And for the feds to get it down to that level where it's going to be at the county level or to the small action team that you have in your communities, for gosh sakes, this is a long process. So, states need to take control. And Drew, I did read your article too, and I thought it was brilliant. It's at that state level, and there needs to be some duplicative error. And I think eventually there's going to have to be some kind of collaborative approach around states have their maps, because all these states are really aggressive and they're big states doing their thing, and so there's going to have to be some type of consensus where we come together and say, hey, our data, against your data, let's talk about that.
Russ, when you did the maps in Wyoming and Washington, and just your thoughts now, kind of looking from the outside, do the state maps tend to have a greater public facing component than we understand this new FCC map is going to have? Is that right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things, right? If you want to get the community engaged, allow them to see the information, allow them to participate. When they put a dot on the map, allow that dot to show up, right? So they can say, oh, look what I did. They'll tell their neighbors, hey, for us to really start to tell a story about what service we have here, or how poor it is, or how good it is, get your dot on the map, so that's what it became. And it really became an opportunity for us to tell a great story in Washington, allowed us to lead this. Megan in her company helped us, go after the first NTIA money, which we assumed was the priming of the pump for this next round of NTIA funds. And in fact, we were right. But because we had those maps and we had all that information, we were first in line. I think we had the first application in that last round of NTIA funds because we had shovel-ready projects at the community level built on mapping that we had done locally. And I think you're gonna want to get that done right now in advance, well ahead of what's going on with the FCC mapping. You're gonna want to be able to start to identify some areas of need, and the states have to take that lead.
Do you
At what
guys
point do
see?
you think there's gonna? I'm sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I'm sorry, there's always a little delay sometimes. Do you guys see, the mapping being able to include some type of speed test data? Because we do a lot of feasibility work, and we triangulate, all the speed test data that's out there, both M Labs, UCLA, et cetera. And then, we work a lot of times like with Megan's group to, obviously help write, these grants, but then we'll then do speed testing within the community and partner with the Chamber of Commerce, and then we validate and triangulate all that information, and then put it against the 477 data. And of course, it's always dramatically different, but it really gives us a statistical sample, and then we go out in that given area and we actually go on to the competitors' websites and enter enough local addresses to get a relevant statistical sample of what we really understand the coverage to be in a given area for competition to help that municipality, really figure out what the opportunity is. So like we are able to create an amazing view. It's honestly not rocket science. It's a little bit of heavy lifting and partnering with the community, but we then provide an incredible relevant view of what's really, really happening. And I always find it so interesting that we can't replicate this at a national level.
Brian, are you making that map available publicly? What do you do when you do this in your work at Bonfire?
It's typically as part of our consulting, as we're working with a client up front in the beginning of a project stage, and they're trying to figure out, Drew, what are the options? What should we consider? What business models? And part of that is really to understand, well, what does the competition have, and where is it, in your area? Because every one of these deployments is a bit different. I always like to say they're like a snowflake, right? They all have their idiosyncrasies, because if someone already has really, really good coverage in a given area, the municipality doesn't have to focus on, the entire area build if there's already coverage and some competition, right? But then giving them that view is the magic, quite frankly. But it's something, Drew, that could be created on a national level. It's just something our team and a bunch of smart, programmers have figured out how to do to help give that,
right,
view to somebody, right?
Yeah, we had just 2 weeks ago on our Broadband Breakfast Live Online a discussion about broadband mapping and data. We tend to do one every 2 months, right? We had one on Groundhog Day, one in April, and just 2 weeks ago. And there was a lot of discussion about speed tests, per your question, Nick, just a moment ago, that speed tests are going to be vital. Now, I don't think that's on what has been done thus far at the FCC, but the NTIA is definitely spoken about the need to verify data. And let me just step back a little bit here. I have obviously followed this broadband mapping stuff for more than 15 years. Broadband Breakfast originally began as Broadband Census. We were a data collection effort. We prompted the first lawsuit against the Federal Communications Commission to get Form 477 data. We lost the battle, but we won the war, so to speak, in that the 2009 Broadband Recovery Act did require the creation of a census block by census block map of carrier availability. Well, that is not good enough, as we've obviously learned, particularly when you're assuming that everyone in a census block is covered because one person is covered. That's the flaw that's being addressed now that we have address level mapping. But the other piece that's so important here is that we need to make sure we're including reliability. We're including measurements of speed. We're including physical maps. Now maybe there's not going to be the unicorn map that has it all. Maybe we're going to just be in a heterogeneous period where lots of different people have maps, some of which are closed and proprietary, some of which are open to some extent, because I think it is crucial, like Russ was saying, we do have to have some degree of public accountability, and these nonsense arguments about confidentiality and proprietary nature that have been around for 15 years are just that, nonsense. These are businesses that are offering their services to the public. Well, just like, Yelp or Google will have reviews and, restaurants are rated. We should sure as heck be able to rate our broadband providers, to do speed tests, to link them to the providers, and then importantly, to be able to allow new entrants to come in and compete to build networks. And that obviously is what we're hearing from the NTIA. They're not running from the term overbuilding, which most politicians do run from, because that's what we're going to need if we want to get higher capacity broadband in this country, is more overbuilding of low capacity networks with high capacity networks. So the big picture perspective here is that mapping is done oftentimes for different purposes. Sometimes it's done to advertise your products. Sometimes it's done to promote reverse auctions of underserved areas. Sometimes it's designed to provide accountability through speed tests of the measures or the claimed measurements of providers. But we also need to remember that it's going to be important to sort of show, hey, this is where there's some lacking, and this is where an entrepreneurial new internet provider, whether that's Siskiyou, is that how you say it, Russ? Whether it's right, yeah. Siskiyou Telephone, or whether it's an electric co-op, or a city that feels that not everyone in their city is getting the service they need. These are all, in my view, legitimate and valid reasons for why you'd want a better broadband map.
It just seems like there's, I'm sorry, Megan, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and I'm kind of tying this back to last time I was on Beer and Broadband, but I think there needs to also, in this mapping effort, be a lot of community outreach. Like, obviously, I assume we have all taken speed tests. I take them anywhere I go on my phone. It gets me really excited, but a lot of people still don't know. And those are the areas that we need to get speed tests from. So I think community awareness building on, what the issue is and how you can assist in this, like how you can take a speed test. And I know there are a lot of great collaboration efforts already with some tribes. I know there's some place in the South that had like a crawfish boiled to like let people know, hey, come eat this. Also go home and do a speed test. And I think that's going to be a huge part. And getting the more people we can get to do it, the better. And that's going to take a lot of community outreach.
I had definitely pull them out.
Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying crawfish will definitely pull some people out.
I've got the idea on how to make this happen, and I've had the idea for a couple of years. And it's we need to, just like we do a National Physical Fitness Week in this country, we need to do a National Broadband Awareness Week, and we need to talk about it at a national level to let kids in schools understand why broadband's critical and important. My 6-year-old, my 7-year-old knows broadband better than most of us on this call right now, because he just lives it and eats it and breathes it, because Dad comes home and talks about it all the time, right? So, and he plays on the Minecraft, and he's doing those things, so he knows why it's important and why it's critical, and he talks to his buddies about it. We should continue to educate people on why broadband is important, how it can affect their lives, and how it's a critical infrastructure from 6 years old up to 80 years old, whatever. And then in that Broadband Awareness Week, we should honor a kind of a speed test week, across the country, and let folks just be encouraged and do some public announcements about, let's do some speed tests, let's get some information. Now, your biggest pushback will be providers, right? And I'm a provider now. So the biggest pushback would be providers saying, well, wait a second, that data is not great. It doesn't tell what our network can do, because people might be buying lower speeds, or they may have crummy internal networks and all that kind of stuff. you know what, we're not looking for one-offs. What we're looking for is patterns in the data, right? And I think, when you do something at that magnitude, which we did in the state of Washington, I had over 60,000 speed tests, right? And most of those tests were coming from areas of need. When you have broadband, you're not paying attention, right? So you're not getting a bunch of good tests in the downtown areas. Where you're getting those tests is out there in the boonies, where people are going, how do I tell my story? I got to tell my story, right? So, it's an effective method, and you can navigate the pushback from the provider side just by saying, we're not acting on one-offs. What we're acting on is sample size data that gives us some type of a critical, conversation to have at a local level. So
it seems like there's a real opportunity to create kind of an open source platform that, the community, all communities can contribute to. I mean, we do this with Wikipedia and others, right, that have become staples and backbones of information. Why can't we do this, with broadband and speed testing and you're taking a lot of different data points into ultimately a platform, but you're exactly right, Russ, you're looking for patterns, right? And then being able then to drill down all the way to the address level is a really, really big deal. But sometimes people have, privacy issues when I think about those kinds of things. But I mean, we can get there. This is not solvable, but I love the idea of Broadband Week. Kind of.
But in Washington, I had two maps.
We can make it a thing.
I just wanted to take on the privacy argument. I really don't think that's a legitimate argument, Brian, insofar as if we can identify whether a provider is offering service to a particular area, then I mean, that's not saying anything about John Doe's purchasing of broadband. Now maybe if John Doe puts himself on a map and says, hey, I live here. Well, anyway, I mean, I don't know if he'd want to put himself and his name on an address. So I guess I just want to, unless there's something else that I'm missing, I don't think that this privacy argument to forgoing address level is one that we should bend to the carrier's will, which they often use to.
I think you're right.
Hey, but hang on, privacy is not a carrier conversation. There's a lot of people in the serving territory that I serve right now that don't want to be known, don't want to be put on a map.
Well, they don't need to put themselves on a map, but their home is on maps already. It's I mean, I can do a satellite view of anyone's home. So I'm just trying to find out if Verizon or Comcast or the local electric co-op can serve that particular home once I see it on Google Maps, right?
No, is there a perfect map?
The unicorn? No, it doesn't exist. It's going to exist in the combination of multiple maps. That's, I guess, right. what I think. I mean, I love, Brian, your point about the Wikipedia. I mean, like, crowdsourcing data has been what we've been all about, trying to allow people to do speed tests. I mean, the crucial point, and we're trying to get here, right? I mean, I think that the FCC's is the beginning steps of this, but it's not clear yet, to me at least. Russ, I don't know if you have any insight on, like, are actual data going to be incorporated into the very data structure of the FCC map, or is that going to be incorporated into the structure of state maps, or do we need something else? Where are we going to be able to go to look at and compare the maps of speed, of promised speeds versus actual speeds?
See, and that's where I've got some problems with the way this thing's getting set up right now, because they are asking me what, as a provider, I provide at that location, or what I have the capability of providing at that location, right? So, that's going to differ from what's actually happening at that location, as we all know, especially when we're talking about copper infrastructure. Now, fiber infrastructure is a different thing. If we start talking about, I got fiber to the door, we're pretty confident that I'm going to have some pretty scalable broadband to that location. But on copper infrastructure, that's shooting, that's bad policy, right? Because you can say I'm 25.3 because I got a pair of copper and I can do an ADSL service to that. But we all know 25 megabits never coming over an ADSL circuit on a single pair of copper on a regular basis to all the locations. That's just not going to happen. I will answer, Nick, in my thought, that the map I had in Washington I felt was very, very good. Where I had a back end map that I used on my computer that the office used that had very proprietary information on it. I then took that and put that into a ArcGIS map for public view, so that the public got to see this ArcGIS map. They could drill in on an area. When they drilled down in that area, I had a dashboard to the right-hand side that talks about what the average speeds are in that area, what their latency is, what their jitter is, what the ping is, all that kind of stuff. So I had all that information, and they could just drill down. Now, when they got close, again, in fairness, to try to make certain dots don't show up on maps that have specific priority, when they got closer, the dots would disappear, but the data stayed over there. So as I drilled in on 4 homes, I still had the data for 4 homes, but I didn't know what homes had what, right? Because I took that away at a certain level of view. But I felt the mapping initiatives that we had in Washington were superior, and I tried to sell, the FCC and the folks on, we should be looking at something like this, and I've always been of the school of thought, it's not this or that, it's going to be this and that. To your point, Drew and Brian, I think it is going to be a look at what are the multiple things that we can bring together. But again, broadband, if we adopt the fact that broadband is a community up discussion right now, we got to give the community power. Right. And they're only going to have power if we allow them to have a voice. So
maybe the community should vote on the map.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the communities had no say on what the
we absolutely need to have upvoting and downvoting. Is this result accurate? Yes, no. I mean, that's got to be part of this, database in the sky, or the mashing of databases that we're talking about here.
Agreed.
So is there any, I guess, obviously a lot of this shift now is delaying progress, right? Like debating this, and then the consideration process that's going to drag out, right? The whole idea was all this money was available, and then now they can't get, we can't move forward with some of this because we're going to have to go back and forth and debate.
Well, is there a question of clarification there, though? Because Megan, you said that all states will get $100 million. Will the states be able to start doing what they want with that $100 million, as long as it's towards broadband and meets the definition of, unserved? Or do they have to still wait for all the mapping to get figured out, even to use their first 100 million? Do you guys know?
I'd love to weigh in on that, if I could. There's a couple of things going on at the same time. And I think that the most important point to this timeline is that people are already accepting, and it's kind of getting baked into the expectations, that broadband IIJA BEAD money, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Act, that's not coming until a year, even a year and a half from now. That's, everyone's kind of already expecting that. Now the 100 million that every state will get will be supplemented by the numbers that get crunched by the map. So at some point over the next 18 months, we'll get to those numbers. But even before that comes along, there's other multiple things going on. For example, state broadband offices, today, July 12th well, I don't know when this is getting launched, so sorry about that. Shoot.
It's all good.
There are other things going on, right? So, for example, on July 12th, the state broadband offices were required to submit their digital equity planning grant applications. And that's something that will then lead into a second round of digital equity project grants, but it more importantly will lead to the states developing their plans, which is the trigger. They need to do within a year of the date that they say they're going to participate, which date is July 18th. So within a year of July 18th, 2022 or 2023, that's when states need to come forward with their plans for how they want to develop. So in other words, the point I'm getting at is, it's not going to happen for a year or even more on the BEAD program, but there's the planning grants that are happening now, and the middle mile grants are due on September 30th of this year. So that's in some ways going to, cut the queue and come out first, is these middle mile grants, which don't depend as much on these more refined broadband maps. So long answer to a simpler question, Brian or Nick, about timetable. Do you want to add anything to that, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, obviously with the planning, the states will get 5 million of their funds to help them with the planning and figuring out what they're going to do. There's also, I think, an important one that we can't forget, the Digital Equity Competitive Grant, which will be, from what we hear, sometime next year. I would anticipate before this 18-month period of when we would see BEAD. So I think that's going to be coming before as well. And there are, other opportunities. I would say a lot of states are still running their program from, CARES money. There's still a lot of different funds where states have gotten money and are running programs. I think obviously national funding is fantastic, but there's a lot of state funding too that I think is worth paying attention to. For Russ calling out California stuff, in the fall, beginning of December, maybe they're doing a last mile grant, which I think will be fantastic because it's awarding money for urban last mile, which I think is something that often gets forgotten. I know Russ is very rural, so it has rural money too, which is great. But I think urban last mile, which is something that we're not hearing as much of federally. So it's very encouraging, I think, to see that coming from California and hopefully other places as well, because, for a lot of federal ones, those areas aren't eligible. So that's there's a lot of state stuff coming as well. So, while BEAD is a ways off, I wouldn't be discouraged that,
absolutely
there's nothing happening. Like there's still things coming out. There's still programs that are coming from different funding sources, different appropriations. So don't get discouraged, but also be realistic about BEAD funding. So.
Yeah, I didn't want to discourage. However, Megan, when you said Russ and rural, I had to double take because I didn't know if you're talking about Russ,
rural utility service,
the purpose, or which is another Department of Agriculture that has a very robust and active broadband program. In fact, they've just released, I think it's round 4 of Reconnect, and so this is something that literally in the start of July it's come out, and so there are more than one train moving along, so to speak, besides the IIJA BEAD program. Absolutely.
I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on open access in the last mile. SPARQ Open Fiber is obviously a company we've launched recently that's focused on building last mile open access over a lit 10 gigabit network. And a lot of the areas we're looking at don't qualify initially for funding, but then of course in those markets there's then areas outside of the markets in the counties that potentially could qualify. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts around open access, and is that how do you think the approach should work in those kinds of situations? I mean, obviously partnering with the community is a big piece of it, but do you see the open access carrier going, or a wholesaler, if you will, going directly after those potential funds in those areas, or does that need to be in partnership with an ISP?
Brian, that's a great question, and I'm going to need to follow up with you to learn about the SPARQ Open Fire, because we'd love to do a story about that on Broadband Breakfast. We've covered a lot about open access on Broadband Breakfast. I would say we've been kind of early or ahead in talking about the reasons why it isn't a brain dead business model, which is what most people in America thought 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago in the broadband community. There's a lot of reasons why it makes sense, particularly when you are talking about universal open access, universal availability in a community. And it can be, I think what's so exciting about the space of broadband in general, but of open access in particular, is there's a lot of ferment about the business models behind it, right? You can talk about one player owning the infrastructure, another player operating the infrastructure, and multiple providers on that infrastructure, right? Now, I don't know what Russ's take on this will be. I'd love to hear what he has to say about this, but kind of from the viewpoint of a journalist covering broadband, as an attorney who's worked with multiple projects, both states and private providers, there are so many benefits to having an open access system in the long run that you're going to have, because of the benefits for competition, because of the benefits for innovation, because of the leveraging different parties' natural strengths, whether it be cities' knowledge of their rights of way, whether it be private companies' capabilities of operating networks. And truly, we, in my opinion, we haven't really seen the fullest wave of flourishing of why we're going to see multiple purpose, I call them ASPs, application service providers, rather than internet service providers. We're going to have lots of opportunities in that regard. So I'm a huge fan, but I do acknowledge that it's still newish, and the new wrinkle you've just raised here on this, Brian, is do they have a fair shot at getting funds in the BEAD process? Because you need at least, 2 or 3 parties to team up in an application.
Exactly.
I'll chime in and just let you know that, from my history of being a policy guy in the States, all tools in the toolbox, I think, are critical, right? So I think open access networks are critical, but I also think we have to honor some of the private investment that's made in this country as well. So I'm of the nature of all. And there'll be applications that'll be unique that will require those types of services. So I'm fine with that. What I caution us, and I think everybody has cautioned, and you hear it all the time, is that there is a lot of sunk investment. So where that sunk investment has been doing good work, I think we have to honor that good work. Where that sunk investment has just gone on and left stranded assets and stranded customers, all day long, let's talk about how we're going to get services into those folks. But we've got a lot of good ISPs and small incumbent providers out there in this world that have done yeoman's work in these deep rural areas that otherwise would have no service, right? Remember, you guys are talking about areas where there'll be multiple ISPs wanting to come in and serve. I serve an area where nobody wants to come in and play, right? And the only reason people have service is because this company is here and doing it. Now, I'm also subsidized to do that, right? So in essence, I am an open access network. And don't forget, any incumbent is basically an open access provider. They've got to provide their services in a wholesale basis. Those rates are published if they're receiving any federal or state funds, and people can come in and play on those networks. The challenge is, because those networks are federally stood up or with state funds, there are some barriers, and that's cost is a big barrier because it costs a lot to build those infrastructures and those networks. So I think there's absolutely great examples of community networks and open access networks. Washington State had a bunch of beautiful ones up there, a lot of good work getting done up there. And there's a lot of places where it's applicable, but also honor some of that investment that's gone in there and make certain that we're not trampling on top of that and in a way that could harm some of the good work getting done. Because we've got a lot of incumbents out there that are providing fiber to the home and doing great work in the places that they're doing.
I would say, from a grants perspective, just to maybe end this one, is that you do get points on certain applications for being open access. That is something we're seeing on grants now, is that you will receive different consideration or points for an open access component.
We got points, we got upvoting, we got maps, we got the FCC, bad data, good data, unicorns.
Broadband week.
Huh?
Broadband week.
Broadband week. Yeah, we've talked about a lot of things today. We have come to the close of our allotted time with Beer and Broadband today. So we wanted to end with our traditional parting thoughts from each of you. And I know I've definitely taken a lot of notes now, Russ. I do think we should start a campaign for this National Broadband Week. But let's go around the country, so to speak, and kind of final parting thoughts before we let you guys go. And let's chivalry's not dead, so I'm going to start with Megan.
I will say, as long as it's not like the presidential fitness test, I still have scarred childhood memories from that.
Arnold, right? Yeah.
I know. Oh, the flexed arm hang. Anyway, yeah. I would kind of go back to something I had said earlier, and again, I'm always looking at a grants perspective of this, but don't be discouraged. I know we talked a lot about mapping issues, grants, timelines of when funding is there, but there's reason to be excited and hopeful. People should be realistic, but don't despair. There's still a lot going on and a lot happening, and it's worth still being engaged for Broadband Week.
Russ.
I'm going to, it's in the spirit of baseball season, right? At least you're going to publish this during baseball season, aren't you? I mean, yes. You don't have to be date specific, but
no.
But I'm going to throw a curveball at this whole deal, and I'm going to bring in one that we haven't really talked about. And that's the taxing of broadband grants. We've got all this money that's going to come. We've got billions of dollars that are getting ready to hit the market. A lot of that money is supposed to be focused on these unserved, very rural areas. That's the nature. That's the focus of a majority of these funds. And in order for that to happen, people that receive those funds, if they're taxed at a state and federal level for receiving those funds to serve areas that have no return possibility to them or very minimal return possibility to them, it will mitigate those dollars going to the people that need it the most. We need a policy that actually goes back and reverses the Tax Cut Jobs Act, taxing of broadband, taxing of grants to entities that are trying to do the good work out in the deep rural areas. So I think there's finally getting to be some momentum around that at the federal level. We pushed some policy up forward to some of the federal folks to discuss, but I think this is a critical issue that will actually either make or break rural broadband in this country.
Can I do reactions, Nick?
Sure. There you go. Drew.
So let me close with 2 points. Broadband Breakfast is all about news and events to bring the broadband community together. I'm so excited. I've been asked to participate in this event. Normally, as I said, I'm on the other side, and every Wednesday at 12 noon, we do a Broadband Breakfast live online. And this summer, we're calling it the Summer of Broadband. We're doing events in different states or with the officers of different states. We're doing Utah, we're doing Indiana. We hope to do other states. Maybe we'll get to Wyoming. I mean, there's all kinds of Washington. There's all kinds of states that are, first of all, every state is going to play a very significant role in the broadband equity access and deployment grant program. And so if you're a provider, if you're a community, you need to get to know your state broadband officers. And that's why we're doing this, to help people get to know their state broadband officials. So watch for our events and sign up to attend the Summer of Broadband. The second takeaway point I want to share kind of builds on this mapping theme, right? And we're going to see a lot. We at Broadband Breakfast report a lot about the IIJA and other aspects. But I think that this mapping thing we've talked about here today, Nick, is really quite critical. And we've been working and partnering with Broadband.money, which has actually assembled some pretty killer apps and maps that show what is available through different sources. So rather than relying on a single source of truth at the FCC, are you kidding me? We're going to have lots of different data bases, maps, checkpoints. States are going to have their maps. They're going to check the federal government. Private companies are going to be checking the carriers. And that's a good thing, right? The more we have, the better. And the more ways we have to check the claims of carriers, the better we're going to be in terms of getting to higher capacity, better broadband, and better lives.
Awesome.
Right.
And Brian, close us out.
Right. All right. Well, first of all, thanks for everyone for joining this early session of Beer and Broadband. And, like I said, thinking about Drew and Broadband Breakfast, I brought my orange juice. As I came in this morning, the kids were like, Dad, you're doing a beer and broadband? Isn't it a little early to have a beer? And I was like, guys, I got my OJ, it's okay. Daddy's not totally complete wild man. But I think the thing I'd like to end on is, while we're talking about BEAD and a lot of things that are going to come in the future, there's a lot of opportunities right now. We're very fortunate to do a lot of work in Indian country and have been, working with several tribes and on various grants. And the thing we try to inspire is, take some risk, get out there and start doing some work. If you got a broadband problem, reach out. There's so many great resources out there. While there's no single source of truth, as Drew said, companies, like everyone represented here today, are always willing to work with folks as well as our company. And we believe that every American deserves affordable broadband. And our job is to do everything possible to try and make that happen. Sometimes it's just introducing someone to another person. Sometimes it's doing feasibility, engineering, constructing their whole network, operating open access. It can come in a lot of different forms, but there's a lot of opportunities out there, and you need to get started. You need to start understanding what you're up against, and you got to start building your plan, and you can get there. There's a lot of great capabilities out there, but it does take time. And like we joke around, it takes a village, and it absolutely does, but it's absolutely achievable. But it's going to take some heavy lifting and get started sooner than later.
I guess I'll react to that too, Megan. To the that in the spirit of the Tour de France is going on right now. So if you guys pay attention to that, so in a peloton, everybody coming together moves faster. So just like this, the more people are coming together and getting a little bit more streamlined, the faster we'll be able to make make and take action to bring broadband to people. So on behalf of Near Broadband, I want to thank everybody for being on here today. Obviously, you can learn more about Learn, Design, Apply by going to their website, Broadband Breakfast, obviously, Bonfire, SPARQ, Siskiyou, Telephone. All these have wonderful websites you can go check out to learn more. You can catch us on YouTube, Apple TV, and Spotify. And again, to our guests, thank you so much and cheers. And we will see you on our next episode.
Cheers. Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.